Hello there. Welcome to Creation Station Monthly. I'm Bob from Creation Station. This is our monthly show where we talk to two creative people about some kind of topic where they get to tell us and explore what it's like to create and build and do and what they want to build and what libraries sometimes have to offer to help them out being creative. I know we keep using that word creative for a reason around here. As always, creationstation@broward.org is the email for comments and suggestions that you want to get to us. I am going to introduce you to our two guests. We have Carol Russo and Erica Edgar. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great.
We're good. I'm good.
So, welcome to you guys both for this. This month we're doing baking. And it was an interesting thing because baking doesn't always get necessarily associated with libraries, but we provide you with lots of cookbooks and recipes and all the stuff like that. But I wanted to get a good feeling from you guys both on how you got into this. Erica, you start us off. Just when did you first want to really get into baking, or how did you get started, or just being creative, or did it grow out of something else?
Well, I got into baking when I was about 5 years old because my mother baked wedding cakes. My mother was a caterer, but she was a baker. And she baked all kinds of cakes, wedding cakes, red velvet cakes, and it was just me and my mom. So I spent a lot of time in her kitchen. And she never taught me how to bake. She never said, I'm going to give you a recipe. She said, if you get in here and be quiet, you can learn everything that I'm doing. And I thought, this is horrible. So I would always clean up behind her. I would organize her ingredients, cleaned her pans, and she'd keep me busy by, oh, go play with the icing. And I was playing with the tips. And I didn't realize until I became an adult, she was teaching me. At the time, I felt like, I was just being punished, like, busy work. But she did teach me how to bake. And I didn't realize as I got older, I had memorized all of her recipes because I was the one who was putting her ingredients together. And I knew everything. It was on the top of my head. And I didn't realize this until I was in my 20s when I started baking on my own. So I started from my mom.
How did you get involved, Carol?
Well, I kind of got interested in cooking when I was old enough to stand on a chair and help my mom. So I know I was younger than like 6 or 7. And my mom never said, as Erica's mom did, she never said, this is how you cook, this is how you do this, and this is how you do this. I was just interested. I like to eat. Therefore, I kind of became interested in cooking. And I was never much interested in baking until my late 20s. And I started baking bread as kind of like stress relief. I was in retail and I was a manager, and I used to get home like 9 o'clock at night. And I would start baking bread, and there were no bread machines then. And this was my mixer, or a stand mixer. And at that time, I tried to, bake some sourdough bread, but I was never able to maintain a sourdough starter. So then when I retired 2 years ago, I kind of went back to it. I said I wanted to do something with cooking. I didn't want to sit in front of the TV and eat bonbons all day. And
You could
if I'm going
make
to eat
them.
the bonbons, I might as well make my own. Yeah. So, and then I started with the sourdough starter, and that's how we got that started.
That's so. Did you guys have both been doing this for a long time for doing all this sort of stuff. Did you guys start using cookbooks at what point, or where do you get inspiration for your ideas for new things now?
Me personally, I've read so many cookbooks and I've read them from, thankfully, my mother collected cookbooks. And so that was pretty much the only reading material we had in our house. And so when I was in the kitchen with her those late nights, I would go to the bookshelf and grab a cookbook. And she had cookbooks all the way back to Fannie Farmer.
Hmm.
And, she would find cookbooks at yard sales. She'd just bring them home. And I never saw her read them, which was interesting to me. I read all of them. And I still have a lot on my bookshelf from her. And I read about how to make dough, how to make cakes, and I would start telling her things I was reading in a cookbook because she'd be like, "Well, where'd you learn that from?" "Oh, I read that in this Betty Crocker annual, yearbook cookbook." And she loved Wilton, so we always had the Wilton yearbook and all the Wilton stuff. And so I taught myself how to decorate cakes from those. It's like basically self-taught because I had the material.
Yeah, I've used cookbooks, for years. Mostly, as I said, I didn't do much baking when I was younger, mostly savory stuff. But I have 2 bookcases full of all kinds of cookbooks, from different, ethnic cuisines to barbecue, because we do barbecuing and smoking meat too. And then mostly, now went to the baking book. So I would, get the ones from the library. And then if I really liked them, then I would, order them and buy them. So that's quite a good selection. But I think, and Eric, if I heard what you were saying, you don't actually follow the recipes in the
Right.
cookbook.
Mm-mm.
I don't. They're guides and they're
Mhm.
inspirations.
It's a
And I
tool.
can read a cookbook the way some people read a novel.
Me too.
And I just take stuff from it and say, well, what if I did this instead of what he or she is saying? And that's using your own creativity.
Oh yeah.
That's what we're always talking about.
Yep.
Carol, you made a mention there of ethnic for cooking, and I think everybody's pretty familiar with doing like various different dishes, all across different cultures. What do you guys think about baking that way? How much difference is there in baking across different things like that?
That's a hard question.
Yeah. A lot of cultures don't use yeast.
Mm-mm.
They don't use, breads that rise.
Mm.
They do a lot of flatbreads in the Middle East.
Corn flour.
And right, corn flour in Mexico, they do that too. Some Chinese cookery has bread doughs that rise,
Right.
like in northern China. They make some dumplings and different kinds of dim sum that requires dough that rises. I don't do a lot of that stuff. Again, 95% of what I do is sourdough. But it's got some Italian influences in it. So, because of some spices and olives that I use in olive oil. But it's interesting. I know that stuff is out there.
I know in most, one thing I love about Japanese and Asian baking, rice flour, because I don't eat gluten. So I started incorporating that more into my baking. So when I went gluten-free like over 15 years ago, and I remember thinking, I have all these cookbooks and none of them are gluten-free, but like you were saying, we don't follow the recipe. And I realized every cookbook that I have is a gluten-free cookbook if I just switch out the flours or the gluten ingredients for, whatever it compensates. And that's what I learned with Asian cooking. I love Asian baking because it's mostly rice flour based and it has that chewy texture and consistency I love with wheat flour that you don't get with most gluten-free cooking.
Erica, since what I bake is, as I said, about 90% sourdough, what do you know about a sourdough starter that's made with like rice flour or instead of wheat flour?
Well, interesting about that. With that, okay, the only thing bread wise, okay, first of all, gluten-free bread. Ooh, okay, that's like a whole different that's a nightmare. And the one thing I can make very well bread wise gluten-free is biscuits. I learned how to make the biscuits rise. But you can use the same ingredients with the rice flour. Your wet ingredients are what's going to matter. You're going to find out you can get your starter, but when you put it in there to get it to rise, you're going to have issues if you use plain water. So my secret, which I kind of discovered, is carbonated water. It works the best. 7-Up, Sprite, or just plain, soda water, life changer. And I learned that I figured that out a couple of years ago because I make gluten-free biscuits. The first time I made gluten-free biscuits, I have the photo. They were like this. Now, when I make a wheat biscuit, I call them cat head biscuits. They were big, fluffy. My kids loved them. First gluten-free, the flour looked the same. My dough looked the same. I said, these are going to come out perfectly. Nope. They stayed just like this. And it's so funny because they were like this. And when I put it in the oven, they dropped. And I sat and cried. And we're sitting on my kitchen floor crying. And my daughters ate them. They're like, oh, these are so good. And I said, well, it tastes like my biscuits, but these are horrible. They're little discs. And I kept experimenting. And I said, I'm going to figure this out. It's either the fat, it's either this, and I was using different types of water. And then one day I had, I'm not for sure why we don't drink soda in this house. There was Sprite. One of my friends had come and had left a can of Sprite in my fridge. And I was like, what is this? And then I thought, what if I put this in my biscuits? What would happen? Because I know there are some recipes where you can add like 7-Up to cakes and stuff. I just never done it. And sure enough, that was the one day that I made a gluten-free biscuit, and it just was beautiful. So that's one of my secrets when I make my gluten-free biscuits is
Hmm.
I add, um, carbonation.
Right. How about buttermilk?
Oh God, I love buttermilk. But so buttermilk works well. But like I said, the interesting about gluten-free baking is it's always going to come down to your liquids, like how it's going to absorb it, you know. Sometimes it separates.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes you're going to get a watery mess, sometimes you're going to get a dry mess. And so to keep it simple, what I've learned is for my fat, I just use pure butter, or sometimes ghee for my fat. And then, I stick with the carbonation for my liquid. But I
Nothing
keep it
wrong with
simple. So
butter.
I don't do like a lot of gluten-free bread per se. I
Mm.
do mostly like biscuits and cakes. But to actually make a big loaf of bread, I think I've made it twice. Um, because one, I don't eat bread. And then two, just one of my daughters is gluten-free. So, it's kind of hard to make like a big, when you start making dough and you have so much dough. The
Mhm.
pizza, when we get into it though, everybody eats the pizza or the breadsticks.
And Carol, I know you do a lot of bagels and stuff like that. Is that carbonation a trick for that water that I keep hearing you can only do bagels if you have special water?
Not true.
Not true?
Not true. It's
Okay.
not, it's not all about the water. Um, I make bagels that I think, or people tell me, are as good as any bagel shop down here in Florida. And it's not about the water, it's about the technique and the tools that you use and the flour. I mean, you need high gluten flour. Sorry, Erica.
Yeah, I know, but it's the truth.
Yeah, and I use the high gluten flour. I mean they're yeast. I don't make sourdough bagels because
Mhm.
I like New York style bagels. Having being born in New York, to me, there's a certain bagel. It's got to be a certain way. Um, so
Nice and
yeah,
chewy.
no, it's not all about the water. Don't believe that.
I made gluten-free bagels one time. And they came out the reason why I only made them once, they came out too well. They were delicious. I said never again
Ah,
because my daughter and I ate all of them. And I made it as you would do a traditional bagel because I always try everything the traditional way. And see, the great thing about a bagel is you don't have to worry about it rising, too big. And we boiled the
right.
water and, we did it that way and we finished them off in the oven. We ended up making bagel bites. Oh, and pretzel bread. I told her, I said, never again because
Oh,
I would
that
eat
would be
all of
me.
this because it tasted too real. I said, this tastes like the original one, and I'm never doing this again because I cannot do this. I don't eat carbs.
I was in Publix yesterday and the pretzel rolls were there, and I was like, oh,
Oh
that's
my
just so
gosh, a
tempting.
bagel.
So
I
tempting.
love bread. That's the funny part. Love it. Bread and butter and garlic. I mean, come on. It's the trinity
So
of
let me get you guys have both started a little bit about when you were young and you were using your parents' equipment, and now you're obviously doing all your own. What kind of equipment did you start with, or do you back then? And what has changed now and stuff that's available to the general public or to somebody who's in the consumer or prosumer area? Because I mean, Carol, you're actually selling and doing stuff, and Erica, you're almost at that level. Um, what kind of equipment would you say the changes have been? Or has there not been changes?
Well, there's been a lot of changes, expensive ones. KitchenAid is really popular now, but whole bar mixers are really nice too. So when I first started, my mother had like a beautiful KitchenAid, and I remember when I first moved out, she goes, "I'm going to get you a mixer," and I was like, "Great, I'm going to get my first KitchenAid." Oh no, Cuisinart, plain basic hand mixer, and I was disappointed. I said, "This is the one," and she goes, "Yeah, you got to start from the beginning." And I was like, "Well, I've been using your KitchenAid." She goes, "You've been using my KitchenAid. You work your way up." So I was, pretty upset, but I used a little, thing, and then I wanted her pound cake pan. It was perfect, but she bought me one. It was like hers but new, and I wanted hers because you're not getting mine. If you want it to look like mine bake, it'll turn out like that. And I remember when I got my first KitchenAid years later, and I have three of them now, and I loved it, but I always went back to the hand mixer. ended up buying a KitchenAid hand mixer. But my favorite tool is just my whisk. And I noticed that I'll use my kitchen, it's more convenient, but I always love to just hand whisk everything. I like to take my time and slowly whisk everything. And I use my KitchenAids mostly for my icings when I make a really nice fluffy buttercream, and it just whisks so much air in it. And but when I make my cake batters and stuff, it's all hand whisked. And
Erica mentioned hand mixers, and these are my hand mixers.
yeah,
Um, my sourdough breads are mixed mostly by hand.
hmm
I do have, I bought last year a commercial KitchenAid, an 8-quart. That's kind of nice.
hmm
And I use it for bagels, and I use it for the rye and pumpernickel breads that I make. But someday I'd like to get a bigger one. I'd like to get like maybe a 20-quart commercial type mixer. And I know, Erica, you mentioned Hobart. They're
yeah.
hard to get, and when you get them, they're pretty costly.
Oh yeah.
So that's on my my dream list if I ever, expand this baking. I don't know, it's just me. It's just me who bakes. So, I mean, right now, I started with a home oven, a single oven, and then we redid our breakfast room into a baking center, and that has a double oven and a butcher block countertop and lots of shelves for flour buckets and all kinds of, baking supplies. But as I said, I'd like to, get a commercial type mixer if the budget and space can accommodate it. And these, like a professional oven that will inject steam, because the sourdough is all about the steam and rising. And what I do right now is a technique that I picked up from a couple of different books. I bake the breads in these enamel roasters, as enamel wears a blue speckle stuff.
Mhm.
It's oval and it's got a cover, and I'm up to 7 of those now, and I can do up to 12 at once in the 2 ovens that I have, and I've only done that once.
Oh wow.
And yeah, it requires a little attention. But it's kind of good. They bake part way with the cover on, and then I take the cover off. And they bake pretty well in there, and the covers keep the steam in.
Steam in there. Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah, it's really a good technique. But again, if I could somehow upgrade to commercial ovens, the whole house has to be rewired for that. So
Oh yeah.
it's a dream. It's a pipe dream.
What's your dream equipment, Erica?
For my kitchen or for baking. So I just renovated my kitchen last year. Got a whole brand new kitchen. I just want a sub-zero fridge and that you could walk into, and all Viking appliances, nothing major. So, but I have an electrician coming out in a couple of weeks because I did some work on my patio, and while he's here, plan to see about having my kitchen rewired, like she was saying, to accommodate for a commercial oven, because I think I'm going to splurge on one this year. And there is a difference. You have to have a different wiring code for that. Because I do have a cottage license to, bake out of my kitchen here in Georgia. But that's what I would love. Like that's it, the stove and an upgraded fridge and more space.
Fill us in on that one, Erica. So what kind of, you said you have a license, and I know, Carol, you
Cottage
must
license.
have something up there too.
Mhm.
Tell us about that. If somebody
Yeah.
really wanted to get into baking and they think that they know what they're doing, what is it that they have to do? Erica's up in Georgia, Carol's down here in Florida. What do you guys think about the differences are, or maybe they're the same?
Well, I have a cottage license. I just got one because although I'm an accountant and that's my job, but I do sell cakes. I sell like gluten-free baked goods and cakes, and my kids want me to go to like farmers markets and sell and stuff, and I get a lot of cake orders. I actually turned down a lot of cake orders. I turned down a lot this week, but I try to do 3 a week just to stay baking. But I never advertise. It's all word of mouth. Everybody's in love with my strawberry cake right now. I've been making those. I have to make 2 this weekend. And so I went ahead and because I do have a a cakery. My kids named it. Don't laugh. It's called Sugar Mama's Cakery. So my kids don't know what that means, but they were coming up with names. So my kids were like, "Oh, it should be Sugar Mama. That's cute." I thought that was hilarious. So Sugar Mama's Cakery, and I registered that. And so I have that business license, and I went ahead and got a college license. I do have a lot of people who ask me for baking advice, what to cook, recipes. So that's what Bob just showed. I have a page on Facebook. What did you cook today? And we all just discuss baking ideas, and I post a lot of food and cakes that I make, and I always put the recipe so people can stop texting, calling, inboxing me, DMing me. What did you put in this? What did you do this? And it's because it was so overwhelming over the years, I condensed it, and I was amazed at how many people had joined, because it was just a small group of friends. I think we're over like 3,000 right now, or close to 3,000, but I don't let everyone join the group, spam. It just gets overwhelming. But so I add that in there. That's about it. But a cottage license, I kind of went off topic, but a cottage license here in Georgia, pretty easy to get. You just go apply for it. They come and inspect your house, and that's it.
That's,
How about Carol? How about yours?
Yeah, that's interesting because, Erica, you're saying that in Georgia you need a license. In Florida, you don't need a license. They don't come and inspect. Yeah, it's pretty loose.
Even if you sell anything.
Yep.
Wow, I need to move.
I mean, there are.
That makes a lot of sense, because a lot of people from Florida ask me so many times, like, "Oh, how much is this cake?" And they're so open with it on like Facebook and stuff. And I know a lot of people who sell in like food on Facebook or in Georgia. They're very private about the prices, and I'll inbox you. And I'm like, people in Florida are so brazen, because you can get fined here if you don't have a license. So I don't advertise that I have a license, but I do have one. And and I actually have a business license, and I have the cottage license too. And but you have to have that in Georgia, or they will fine you consistently. They'll send you a letter and a warning, whatever. And it's funny is because I have friends that are food inspectors. I'm friends with on Facebook. They're the one who nudged me to get it. Like, "Oh, you should get one." And I said, "Well, I did it already. I just didn't advertise that I did."
Yeah. Interesting.
That kind of feeds into
I'm in the wrong state.
next question. Come on down, Erica. We'll be happy to have you. So where do you guys think what society thinks about what you guys do? Because especially with baking, it's very traditional. The woman's at home making the cakes, Erica, sorry. And then it becomes something that you can actually make money on, and you can show that you actually have, real skills in doing this kind of stuff. What do you guys think about how society's views on this have changed? And particularly, Carol, you were mentioning about sourdough, and I know that was a topic of conversation for the whole pandemic, of how are we raising our sourdoughs and everything else like that going around.
The interesting thing, I mentioned that I started this when I retired 2 years ago. So I had my sourdough starter, and I was baking bread before the pandemic. It's kind of like, I like that musician before he killed himself, same thing.
I know where you're going.
I was baking before the pandemic, and then when the pandemic hit,
everybody's a baker.
Oh, but a lot of with our friends, they were saying, "Oh, we can't get bread in the supermarkets. I need bread." And I said, "Well, I'm already baking, so I will bake bread for you." And I'll buy it from you. And at that time, I wasn't set up to be a cottage baker, and I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. This is a win-win situation. I will bake, good practice for me. You will get the bread for free, but I ask that you make a donation." And I had them making a donation to a canine organization called Take the Lead. And it's an organization for mostly professional dog handlers in dog sports, and most of them don't have medical insurance. And so Take the Lead helps them out if they have any medical March through like October. And we raised almost $3,000. Not a lot of money, but I said to them, "You donate what you can afford."
That's a lot of money.
It was really kind of fun. And then I said, "Well, you know what? I think Take the Lead has benefited. And the pandemic, things kind of opened up and people were able to get bread in the supermarkets. But I actually built up a clientele that way. So I have people who buy bread from me every week or every 2 weeks, and they're always willing to try something new. And that's been kind of fun. That's, to me, something to be proud of. I thought that I helped a
Yeah.
lot of people that way.
That's really sweet. I
And
had,
it's-
well, I noticed here in Georgia during the pandemic, I couldn't find any baking supplies because everybody wanted to be a baker or a cake decorator. All of a sudden, what, you're stuck in your house. So there's, everybody's looking at videos. But I was amazed at how many people want to order a cake or cupcakes or cookies. And I'm like, we're in a pandemic. So for the first time ever, I started shopping at like places like Restaurant Depot, where I was buying
Mhm.
bulk supplies, and I would go in and I said, well, this is going to work out because I don't have to go to the store. And those were the only stores that had products, so I'd
Mhm.
buy bulk
Yep.
sugar and stuff. And I was baking. Last year, I made so many cakes and pies and cookies, and everybody wanted everything. And, so I thought, well, if I had a restaurant or a bakery, this would be great.
Yeah, I know people were saying to me, "Where are you getting the bread, the flour? How are you doing
Mhm.
this?" And Restaurant Depot, I've been there. I was able to get in there, but they didn't have bread flour. Kind of interesting. They
Mm.
have high gluten flour for
Mhm.
bagels and stuff, but I don't need 50 pounds of that. But there's also a store, and I think they're nationwide, called Gordon Food Services, and
Mhm.
their restaurant supply that you don't need any kind of identification, as a business to get into. And I was able to buy 50 pounds of bread flour there.
okay,
So I
so
was giving people flour.
I got a question for you, Carol.
Okay.
What is the difference between bread flour and high gluten flour? I
With
just go and I buy all-purpose flour or I buy bread flour.
Okay,
Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
all purpose is good, but it's not totally all purpose, because it has a protein level that's good for most things. You can bake cookies with it, you can bake cakes with it, though there is a cake flour and pastry flour, which are different. They have different protein levels. Bread flour has a higher protein levels, good for rise and for structure and chewiness. And high gluten flour is the highest protein level of all. And that's for bagels and certain types of more rustic breads. I use it sometimes in my rye bread to give a chewiness.
Because I use bread flour for my pizza dough.
Absolutely.
I have to experiment maybe and see if I can find a small bag of super high gluten to see if that works. Super high protein, I guess.
Yeah, there's also what's called 00 flour, which is an
Okay.
Italian flour for pizza. I use that.
Hmm.
Lot to
So
learn.
you guys, oh yeah, this is exactly it. And this is where we all learn and do these things. So the question that you guys sort of touched on at the beginning, when you were both talking about your mothers, but what kind of help when you got out of that first shadow of that, what kind of help do you wish you would have gotten? Or maybe you didn't, maybe you got the guidance you really felt you needed. Or is there something that you're doing now that you're like, man, why didn't she teach me this? Or why did she let me find that out on my own?
Hmm.
With me, I wish I would have started this younger. I make my own extracts, so I make my own vanilla extracts. Um, I do a lot of stuff from scratch, but then I really started thinking like, oh, well, how do you make flour? How do you make almond flour? How do you make coconut flour? How do you make extract? Because you think from scratch, but you're still going to the store and you're buying flour and sugar, and you're still buying processed food, like Carol was saying. Some things are, the flours are different. Not every baking ingredient is created equally. And one thing I've noticed during the pandemic, and I don't know if it was touched on here in America, but I know Canada's having the issue, but it took me a while to figure out. A lot of my cakes and stuff, they weren't rising as they would, and I was noticing some of the fats were separating. I said, something is going on. This is weird. We're having an issue with our butter here in America, and they're putting more water in it than it should be. And I noticed if you're a baker, you're going to notice that, but our butter is really not as good as it used to be. It's more water. So I started actually separating my butter. I started making ghee, but then I started buying cream and making my own butter
Hmm.
because I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I wish but it tastes so much better. And I
Oh,
noticed the
yeah.
quality of my baked goods are off the charts. People are like, I don't know what you're doing differently with my buttercream. They're like, this stuff tastes amazing. Like it's like ice cream. You could pick it up and eat it.
Mhm.
And it's more light and fluffier. And I was thinking I should have been doing this from the beginning. It's more time consuming, but the quality is amazing. So I'm making my own vanilla extract. And that takes about a year. If you want a really good vanilla extract, it's going to take a year. So I have bottles in here. I've started, and I started making my own butter. So I'm just getting more and more primitive as time goes on.
Frontier
That's
woman.
why it's hard to have a bakery, because to do this at a bigger level it's so hard. I would love to have like like a small market, but I couldn't imagine doing this for like thousands of people.
How do you make butter? Besides, I mean, is
Cream,
it just, well, I know it's cream and I know you
cold
just have
temperatures and
to
cream.
shake it. I mean, in a
Don't
science
do that,
class,
or you can
we
churn it.
made butter once.
You can churn
And
it.
we took it and you had
Or
a
a
glass
mixer.
full of,
Get a
yeah.
mixer.
A KitchenAid mixer.
That's right.
Okay.
And you just sit there and you churn it. And I even bought from an antique market, I bought a butter churner just for
Oh, yeah.
the heck of it. And I started using it. I was doing it for fun. Me and the kids. Children, first of all, are very creative. You sell it as fun, kids are going to do it. Whether it's wiping the walls, cleaning the windows. If you're like, oh, I'm having a great time, you want to paint this fence, you know. So kids will get into anything if you sell it as fun. And one of my daughters loves the science behind it, but my youngest daughter, she loves the idea of like, oh, mom, what are we doing? Here, go shake this jar. Oh, let's run around the kitchen, shake this jar. Oh my gosh, we have butter. Okay, now do 8 more. So
Hmm.
then
Yeah.
they're taking turns. We're gonna churn the butter. They're all having fun. Oh, my arm hurts. Keep going. You could do this. Then we have butter.
That's the old ice
it's
cream
good.
thing.
Homemade butter.
Mhm.
I love we go to somebody's house for dinner and I bring a loaf of bread, still warm, and homemade butter. They're your
I'm
friends
going to
for life.
invite Carol over one of these days.
Yeah. I like
Yeah,
my
I'll bring
butter
the
though
ribs too.
I said I like my butter with bread, but I like my bread with warm olive oil and just a little bit of spices, and then you have that homemade butter right to the side. You mix them together. That's so sinful, but it's so good.
It is awesome. So you guys, we've covered so many different topics. Oh, there we go. There's the
sorry.
purebred. Which one is that one there?
So
That's
cute.
Hemingway.
Hemingway. Okay.
That's the baby. Okay, get down. He was feeling left out.
That's a good thing. They're all good dogs. So what you guys have both been talking a lot about what you've been able to pull off and do so far, but what's the one thing that you made or that you're most proud of, that you're most happy about, that you were able to pull off? That one creation that you were just like, this is like the why I got into this, or this shows how good I can be at this.
For me, my daughters love to go on TikTok or whatever they use in Pinterest, and they'll pull a cake. Because I always give my kids an option. I never had an option growing up. I never was like, my mother never said, do you want to go out to eat? She's going to cook. My mother never said, what kind of cake do you want? Or, it's crazy. As much as my mother baked, I wanted more than anything when I was a kid was a store-bought cake. Why? I have no idea, but I just was never given the option. I remember the first time when I grew up, I bought a store-bought cake for my birthday and was highly disappointed. But that's because I was never given the option. And I was like, this is horrible. I always give my kid the option. You wouldn't go out to eat, or you want me to cook? Oh, definitely cook. And they always choose me, which I'm like secretly like, yes. But I'm like, okay, fine, I'll cook. I try to brush it off. And with their birthday cakes, they've never had a store-bought birthday cake. And I always ask them, do we buy you a cake this year? No. Mom, please make a cake. So they find all these ridiculous cakes they want or ideas, and I pull it off because they think I could do anything, which I'm just like, I don't know if I could do this. But every time I, finish, I feel very accomplished. But the one thing that I made that I literally just got so emotional over is the first time I made a pound cake, and it was exactly like my mom's pound cake. And out of all of her kids, I'm the only one that can make her pound cake, to the point that I'm making 3 of them this weekend and bringing them to my sisters because they bribed me to come there. Will you please bring mom's pound cake, because nobody else can make it like her? And I'm passing that tradition down to my daughters, even though I have the recipe, but nobody can make it like my mom. And it was just because I was there with her all the time. And now I have her pan. So I bake it in her stuff, and every time and I've made it so many times, you know, I know it off the top of my head. But every time I bake it and it releases from the pan, it's just a sigh of relief, and I'm just always overwhelmed with pride. Like, you know, anybody who buys one or has it, I'm always, how does it taste? Is it good? Is it, you know, I'm always like asking a million questions. And it just, I feel very, you know, happy. It's like a piece of her is, you know, here with me.
Mm.
That's a very good thought. How about you, Carol?
Excuse me. Well, Eric and I should compare pound cake recipes because I have one from my mom,
Sure.
and that's awesome. I love it. I love to make it. Um, so yeah, I'd love to know your recipe. But for me, I think it's not something that I make regularly, but there is an Italian pastry that you get at Christmas time. And it's one of the most difficult things, not only to say, but to spell. And it's called sfogliatelle. And it looks like a clamshell. It's kind of shaped like a clamshell or a scallop shell. And it has a pastry cream inside that's made with ricotta and candied citron. And and a few years ago, we made those for Christmas and presented them to my mother on Christmas Eve. And she said, "You made these?" She says, "You didn't make these. You went and bought them at the pastry shop." And I said, "No, we made them." And I was very proud because, again, though my mom didn't, you know, hand feed me, pardon the pun, to learn how to cook, she did encourage me. There you go.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, they take 2 days to make because they're like croissants, because
Beautiful.
there's layers. It's laminated, and they were good. They were pretty delicious. So I guess I'm proud of making my mother proud, and I
That's a
wish she
very
were
good thing.
here to share, you know, the bread that I'm making now. She's no longer with us, but she loved a good piece of bread.
That's a great story. That's really a great thing. I think that's probably where a lot of people are. They it's that family tradition, like you guys have both been saying. You know, it's what are we going to do? How are we going to continue it? I want to come back to your story there, Erica. You obviously you got your pans from your mother. Carol, you got your mother's baking goods equipment from her.
Um, Not so much. She wasn't a baker. My mom was a good Italian cook. You know, she made the sauce,
Mm-hmm.
made meatballs and stuff, but she was not much on baking.
So how much is the for passing down, Erica? The cake pans. You said her pound cake. How is that
Well,
with the gear kind of stuff?
well, okay, so she had this coveted pound cake pan. It was a red pound cake pan, and she bought me the same pan. My mother also passed away years ago, and a lot of her stuff was put away. What's interesting is my mom had so much baking stuff, and I wasn't there when her house was packed up, and nobody cooked in my family or baked but me and my mom. So no one understood the significance or importance of her her baking products. And unfortunately, a lot of it was given away. And what's very interesting is one of my sisters contacted me about 2 days ago, and she said, "You busy?" And I said, What do you want?" And she goes, "I have something to show you." And she found all of my mother's original, these original baking pans that I had always wanted. And she found this recipe. My mother never wrote down recipes. And when I was about, I was in the fifth grade, and I remember saving up money, and I bought her this little brown box for recipes. And I would convince her to write them in there. And she did it, and she just hated it. And she told me, "This is such a waste of time. Nobody's going to remember this. Nobody wants this. Nobody cooks." And she put them in this little brown box. And we eventually ran out of cards. But every time she cooked, I would slide her a card. That was about my daughter's age, 9, 10. And we ran out. And she started using index cards. And I said, one day when I grow up, I'm going to scan them all. I'm going to photocopy and put them in a book and give them to everybody. And she goes, nobody wants it. Nobody cares. And you're wasting your time. And the stuff isn't going to last all these years. Okay. So, years go on. I'm in my 40s. She passes away. I have no idea what happened to this brown box. My sister inboxed me on Facebook the other day and she goes, you may want to come down here in Valdosta, 3 hours away. I said, I don't want to come down there. It's hot. It's 4th of July. She goes, I have something that you may want. She sent me this picture of my mother's box with her recipes, all of them, perfect condition. So when did you find that? It was thrown away in a box. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I was, trying to keep my composure. I said, cool, I'll come down. I'll try to come down this weekend. We'll see if I get a hotel room. Oh, I hung up the phone, ran to my laptop, booked a room immediately, crying the entire time, just tears. I couldn't stop crying for like hours. And so this year, I'm going to scan all of her recipes and take photos of her and quotes from her and just letters she's written me and put them in a nice book. And I'm giving them to all of my nieces and nephews, and all of my sisters, and the original pans that she had, because my mother was a very practical cook and baker. My mother was not for frills. She wasn't for anything pretty. My mother used nice, heavy-duty metal pans. My mother used to cook for people in the military at the Air Force Base. My mother baked. My mother made cakes. They were delicious, but the icing wasn't always even. I'm opposite. It has to be so pretty. She used to get on to me about that. No one's going to keep up with this. It's all about how the food tastes. And I would never eat for Thanksgiving when I was a kid. Why don't you want to eat? Well, I would say, I hate the way it's in these metal pans. It's just so ugly. And I remember one year she bought the Corningware, with the corn flour. She bought the whole set, didn't tell me. And for that year, I came out of my bedroom for Thanksgiving, and my little food was in there. And I said, who's this for? And she goes, I bought that for you, so you can eat your Thanksgiving. I'm not fooling with this. And I just was like, oh my gosh, so excited. And she only used it on Thanksgiving every year just for me. And everybody like, why does she get special food? Well, your sister's picky and she's uptight. And so I just knew after she'd passed away, I just knew when my sisters found that, they were throwing that in the garbage because, but my sister, because I'd never saw it again, she sent me a picture and she had it all and it's in mint condition. I'm going to get it this weekend. I'm doing my Thanksgiving. And then all of her recipes, of course, there's, it's just little things that it's a memory, but it's like having her in the kitchen with me.
That is really, really nice, Erica. Love that story. One last thing. I got to get one more thing for you here. You get slightly more serious in a different way. You guys have both touched on the idea of, Carol, you are selling. Erica, you could sell. You're just choosing really not to at the moment.
I do every, once a few days out of the week.
So you guys have turned it into the career you want to turn this into. You've been able to take baking and turn it into that. But what have you taken out of your baking stuff and been able to apply to the rest of what you're doing and the rest of the world and all the stuff that you interact with and do with people and how you're doing? How do you apply this field of creativity to the rest of your life and what you're doing and how you're doing it?
For me, so I'm an accountant in my real job. It's the most stressful job, and I actually have a billing firm. So for me, baking is peace. When I go into my kitchen and bake, don't talk to me, don't text me, don't call me. I'm not answering the phone. I zone out. It is like, it's the best hours. Like it's so relaxing. Like my whole body relaxes and it's just so peaceful. So for me, it's really like, it's just a small vacation every time I bake. Like I love it so much, but I am an accountant, so I can afford to bake. And but I mean, I don't. But one of the great things about it is my kids are amazing in math. Okay, and even when they were in school, the teachers were like, they're so great with division and multiplication and fractions. Baking, I mean, I would have them in the kitchen and they knew everything by the decimal, and I weigh stuff by the pound, and they knew all their fractions, and they knew multiplication and how to divide because of baking. I applied that with teaching my kids. Um, and that's pretty much it for me. One of the things that I love is I love gardening. And I love buttercream and I love making roses and flowers. And I would combine photography with that. I would just grow beautiful flowers, especially lilies, and I would and roses, and I would take photos of them and try to recreate it out of buttercream.
How about you, Carol?
I enjoy being creative. I enjoy, as we were talking about cookbooks, using them as a guide and an inspiration and not as the rule, and this is how you have to make it. And so I enjoy the experimentation and the opportunity to learn. I always say that every time I bake a loaf of bread, I learn something else. Whether it's, oh, this ingredient works better than this, or we like the flavor of that, or just how the dough works. I made bread last week, and it was a special one-off for somebody. And I started it. I usually my dough takes 8 to 10 hours to ferment the first time. So I either start them in the morning and then I bake at night, or I start them at night and then bake them in the morning. So I started this bread at night, and I woke up the next morning and it hadn't risen. It hadn't done anything. And I couldn't figure out why. And I still can't. Was the starter not fed because we'd been away and it hadn't been fed for a week? And then I realized, and I still don't know if this was the case, if this is what happened, but I realized I had forgotten the salt. Now, I don't know. I know that sugar helps things ferment. It helps the gluten to rise. I didn't know about the salt. So I don't know if that's the case, but I learned something there. Don't forget the salt. Like I said, I don't know if that's what happened, but I'm pretty careful. And as a matter of fact, I use pink salt. I use pink Himalayan sea salt. And a friend said to me, "Why do you use pink salt?" I said, "Because this way I know it's in there." I see it and I say, there's the pink salt. And then I mix it up. So for me, it's the opportunity to learn. And I enjoy, a challenge. I had a friend recently, he said to me, we were talking about this before we started the program, that we go to dog shows and we show our dogs. And people who know we're coming order bread and bagels, and I bring them. So this one friend of mine, he said, "I want bagels, but I want cinnamon raisin bagels." And I said, I don't know how to do them. I know how to put toppings on the bagels, but I've never done anything like maybe put cinnamon in the dough or put raisins. He says, "I want a dozen of them, and I bet you can do it." So he challenged me, and I made them the first time, and I brought them, and I said, "So what did you think?" And he said, "Needs more raisins." Okay. And the next time he said, "You forgot the cinnamon. Put the cinnamon in the dough." So now I can make cinnamon raisin bagels. The third time was the charm. So I enjoy the challenge and the opportunity to learn how to do something that I didn't know how to do.
That's a really cool idea. The hour has just flown on by, guys. Thank you both so much for being here. I showed both of your Facebook pages up on the site. I'll add those to the links for everybody out there. Again, if anybody has any questions or anything that they want, they can feel free to send them along to me, and I will forward them to our guests. creationstation@broward.org, and we will be glad to do that. Thank you again, Miss Carol. Thank you again, Miss Erica, for being here this month. This was a lot of fun. This is a very much more emotional conversation about baking, huh? And we will see everybody next month. Thanks very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.